So you could see it here. I love when I do a story, because I always have to come up with my graphics that you see on the screen here. And it's always exciting when the story is the graphics. So we finally have our first look at the new Superman suit for the new Superman film coming out next year in 2025. So James Gunn, who's the writer and director of the film, who's also kind of spearheading the DCU, if you will, the DC universe, the DC's second answer to the MCU. Gunn posted this image on social media, revealing the suit to the world, saying, quote, "The above photo was taken on set by Jess Melio and was entirely in camera," end quote. So this is our first look at David Corenswet in the role. So just a sidebar here. What a career leveling up that this guy is doing. He's 30 years old, has been in a couple TV projects, the only thing I have ever seen him in was in Pearl, opposite Mia Goth, as like the guy that she kind of falls in love with, and to now he's gonna be Superman. It's incredible, and I wish him all the best until he comes out to be this awful person, in which case I never said that I was happy for him. And I believe that they released that this was done to beat the paparazzi from leaking the image, right? Because they've started shooting and stuff, and the paparazzi are always going to be all over things like this. You only think of paparazzi with like celebrities, like kind of more like salacious things or scandalous things. But if you think about it, there's a lot of money in trying to get the shot, the image of this new superhero, like iconic superhero, this new version of him, right? So this was a really important move to release like an actual photo that like was approved by the marketing or what have you. Because sometimes like certain costume design choices can look like shit when it's just taken with like a phone camera by like a voyeur or like someone from really far away, or not even if they're far away, but just like they're meant to look great in a film, not in like normal room lighting, right? So this was definitely important I'm happy that this is the first time we're seeing it, as opposed to, for Deadpool and Wolverine. In the trailers we've gotten now to see Hugh Jackman in the iconic yellow jumpsuit from the comics. But we had already seen that in leaked set photos, right? Or at least I had. So it kind of took away a little bit of the magic from getting to see that in the trailer. But this is not just cool for its own sake, but this is an important moment. And the Hollywood Reporter notes that, only 3, as opposed to some other superheroes, only 3 people, and now 4, if you count David Corenswet, only 3 people have played the character, have played Superman in feature films on the big screen. So this isn't counting, serials from the 40s and 50s. It's not counting animated stuff. It's not counting TV stuff. In terms of like actual feature film, theatrical films, there hasn't been many people that have gone to play this role, because Christopher Reeve was so iconic and he played him for basically a decade, and then it wasn't touched until Superman Returns. And Brandon Routh, I think no one complained about that movie because of Brandon Routh, but that movie obviously just didn't catch on, so obviously that didn't go anywhere. And then you have Henry Cavill in the DCEU, but that just had issues because people felt like that character wasn't really Superman in a lot of ways. So this is a big deal that we're getting to see this new generation's Superman. And ultimately, I feel like this picture, why it was released, and what people are talking about regarding it, it's really less about the suit and more about getting a sense of the movie's vibes. Because this is both doubling as our first look at the suit, but also really it's our first real look at the film and like what the vibe is going to be, right? So there's a couple of things of note here. So I really feel like this image emphasizes the man in Superman. The idea of him being, he has superpowers, but who he is a human in terms of his nature, right? So, this seems really simple, but I think it is really important in communicating this. We have this banal task of him putting on his shoes, right? I don't think I've ever seen Superman put on his shoes before, right? It makes it feel more tactile. Like this is not just something he just goes into the phone booth and spins around and flies out, and he's gonna save the day. This is like a dude who is obviously superpowered, but like still has to do shit to be a superhero, right? And I'm the only person who, to kind of take it one step further, Mark Hughes from Forbes made the comparison to like a working class man, like he's putting on his boots to go to the factory, right? It speaks to, and also the fact that he's putting on his boots. He doesn't look super concerned or rushed while there's like a giant alien catastrophe happening outside. So because of that, I think that enforces the idea that, as Gunn has made it clear, this is not an origin story. And maybe this speaks to a Superman who's been at this for a while. So it's kind of like him, because the original title of the film was going to be Superman Legacy. And then ultimately James Gunn decided it should just be called Superman. But that also speaks to this idea that maybe this is a Superman who has been at this for a little bit. Not like it's like he's been at this for 50 years or something, but maybe he's been at this and is starting to reflect on the impact that he has had and the impact that he could have, right? And again, this is not like a particularly heroic image, but in a good way. Again, it really emphasizes his humanity. It's something I've noticed. The suit almost looks homemade. Kind of like, even though they're separate universes, I don't want to cross wires here, but it kind of reminds me of Robert Pattinson's Batman, right? It feels homemade. Like, it feels like someone made this, as opposed to a lot of times Superman's suit just almost as like part of his skin, almost. Like, you just can't imagine him not wearing it. And Deadline even called it, quote unquote, rugged. So I think that's a really apt description there. But again, like I mentioned before, that alien, whatever's going on in the background there, it's colorful, right? So maybe we've gone past gray superhero movies, especially that we saw in the DCEU, right? And this is something I was not aware of in terms of like Superman suit discourse, but apparently it's a really big deal. He has the trunks. He has the red underpants outside the pants. And apparently that's a really big deal because I guess he doesn't always have that in appearances, both on screen and also like in the comics. But that's more like classic and iconic, more faithful to the original, design of the character. We have a quote here that kind of gets into this and explains why this is important, I guess, in more detail. William Goodman at GQ writes, quote, "The trunks are an ideological litmus test. Gunn's decision to go with the trunks is a literalization of his desire to return to the classical conception of Superman as a big blue Boy Scout, saving kittens from trees and helping the common folk, rather than the tortured Christ-like figure rather than the tortured Christ-like figure that Superman became in the Snyderverse," end quote. So yeah, this idea that it's you're going to feel about the trunks however you feel about Gunn's interpretation. Like Gunn really seems to be reacting to the Henry Cavill characterization that Zack Snyder, his version and vision of the character, right? So ultimately, that decision and all of these things, ultimately it shows Gunn's intentions to make creative choices as opposed to a film made by committee, right? And I talked about that in my previous story about Disney and Marvel reducing the output, that, people want to see, but I think the main thing that's going to save the MCU and just superhero films in general is filmmakers actually making films and they have something to say. And it doesn't need to be like this like strong moral point or like the moral of the story, the lesson, what have you, but just like an actual point of view and a vision. And I think we're seeing here, I'm not a huge fan of Gunn's work. Like I am a little more tepid, or what's the word? Like I'm a little more lukewarm about the Guardians of the Galaxy films. But this at least shows, and I can respect those films, that at least it feels like a director with a vision. And hopefully he's able to kind of bring that over here as well. In terms of reactions to this, it's really run the gamut. So, Uprocks notes that some thought it was an AI generated image, which I'm not sure why you would think that. But what have you. So I have some reactions here. User Giselle B1234 on Twitter, also known as X, saying, quote, "David Corenswet's Superman curl is literal perfection," end quote. And yeah, he definitely captures again like that kind of like the guy from GQ said, like that, that Boy Scout kind of aesthetic. James Zen Paladin 011 on Reddit writes, quote, looks good to me. Realistic, but still with a comics kind of pop, like a live action Incredibles kind of vibe, which is a good tone to hit in my humble opinion, end quote. But not everyone is happy about this. So we have a quote here from at Jason LeBoy Photo on Twitter saying, quote, dear Lord, he has on red trunks. This cosplay suit is terrible, end quote. MAKG Snake on Twitter said, quote, arg, this is such a bad suit and horrible reveal. Why is the suit loose on Superman? How is it washed out? The damn dumb trunks are back, and why is he putting on shoes when there's end of the world stuff happening in the background? I wanted this to be fake, ... It isn't, end quote. And again, more kind of critiques of this. Screen Rogue on Twitter said, quote, that is the ugly Superman suit ever, in all caps, ever, end quote. And Eric Kane at Forbes. So these aren't just people like on Twitter, just like normal people. People, actual writers are kind of sharing their takes on it. And Eric Kane at Forbes wrote an article titled, quote, James Gunn's first Superman image looks like AI and the suit doesn't fit, end quote. And kind of summarize his point is that he just thinks this looks like shit. The image looks like shit. The suit looks like shit. And he's not very happy about it. I like this for all the reasons. I'm not super particular about the suit design. I'm not like a purist about anything. I think it looks pretty good for the reasons why I said I like how it kind of looks homemade. And again, this image is less about the suit and more about the vibe of the movie. The vibe that it's giving me, right? But again, I don't know. I'm curious when we're going to get a trailer for this. Probably not until the fall. Because this doesn't come out until July of 2025, and they're still shooting. If they really want to try to get something out in the summer to like put in front of Deadpool and Wolverine or something, but I could see this not debuting until September, October, or even like November or December, like getting closer to like kind of like the mini blockbuster season of November and December. But only time will tell.